7 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Guess there's only one thing to do. How about a live show? It's Mission Log Live. I'm Ken Ray.
And I'm John Champion. And you are just soaking in Mission Log Live. Look at that. I can see you just soaking away in the Mission Log Live like you don't even care. This is the show where we get together with you, our Star Trek pals, and we talk about Trek and other things, whatever's on your mind. See, now that part, that's where you call in. We're good, but we don't know what's on your mind yet. So give us a shout. There are a few ways to do that. You can click on the link to join our Zoom meeting, or you can use the one tap from your smartphone. You can also call us, just like Jeff Lynne. If you'd pick up that telephone, 646-558-8656, 646-558-8656. Then enter the meeting code that you'll find in the show description and the comments, and then you are on with us.
Joining us this week, it's Rick Sternbach. Hardly somebody who needs an introduction if you're a dyed-in-the-wool Trek fan, but we like introducing people, so we're going to do it anyway. You want to talk to Rick about designing the 23rd century and the 24th century, plus his passion for real space tech. So get your calls in. 646-558-8656 is the phone number to call. Then enter the meeting code that you will find in the show description and the comments, or you can join our Zoom meeting, just like John said. And then you can use the one tap from your smartphone. Golly, just so many ways to get in touch with us. And you want to keep those handy because we got a lot of stuff coming up in the future as well. In fact, John, why don't you tell people about some of the things happening in the future?
Well, you know, Ken, the future, we're both interested in the future because that is where you and I will spend the rest of our lives, in the future. So on the live show coming up, we have people like Ben Robinson, plus Kevin Dillmore, plus more special guests. So many people coming up on the live show. You're with us now. So just like you do every Tuesday night, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, you tune in on Facebook.com/MissionLogPod, and that's where you'll find us and our special guests. What else is coming up, Ken?
Well, you will also find us and special guests in the virtual realm as well. Got some VR events coming up that I wanted to tell you about. Of course, these are the good people at Sensar who have their whole big VR platform. We've gone in and laid the Roddenberry Nexus in Sensar. That's why we named it that, so we'd remember where we put it. And we've got some events coming up, like next Thursday night, September 13th, we are bringing back Star Trek trivia on the bridge. Could be round one of a trivia tournament. I don't know. I think, yes, that's the plan. So that'll be the first thing that we'll do. That'll be on the 13th. A couple of weeks later, September 27th, we are going back into the Nexus for a tour, this time with a special Star Trek guest. Are we not saying who the special Star Trek guest is, John?
I want to tease it. It's a very special Star Trek guest.
It's a very special.
Yes.
Well, it is a very special Star Trek guest. It's true. I'm surprised that we're not saying his or her name, but apparently we're not. And then on the October 11th, you can go inside Star Trek with us and with Rod Roddenberry. We'll be hosting a special event with clips from the 1976 Gene Roddenberry album, Inside Star Trek. Not going to play the whole album, I don't think, although I can't remember if we're going back and forth on that or not. But John and I and Rod and I and John and Rod have big tracks from Inside Star Trek that really speak to us. And so we're going to play those, and then we'll all sit around and talk about them. Not just the three of us. I mean, just like we do here on the live show, we invite people to come to Sensar, not so, we can stand there and expound, but so we can have a conversation with people who come there as well. All this is free. And even if you don't have the whole headset, even if you don't have all of the, VR rigmarole, let's say you don't have a Rift, let's say you don't have an HTC Vive, as long as you have a relatively recent computer that's running Windows, and yes, Mac people, I hear it from you all the time, but you can actually run boot camp as well. And then you can just go in through a web browser and take part as well. So sansar.com to find out more about that. And we will remind you about those dates again as those dates approach.
Hey, very quickly before we get to the poll, I'd like to say hi to new friends and old friends who are all chiming in right now on Facebook and saying hello. There's Carlos, there's Paul, there's David, there's Ron, there's Jessica, Wes, Tracy Lee Coco, Always nice to see you there. Mr. Willie, Scott Palm, it's a bunch of our STLV buds, Ken. They're hanging out. They're saying hi. Jocelyn, I love seeing this. It's like our own mini STLV right here. So welcome to everybody who is saying hi.
I hope that every one of those people who showed up will, of course, take part in the poll that we have going as well. In fact, before we get to tonight's poll, and we try to fashion it around who our guest is for the week, at least somewhat. Before we get to this week's poll question, though, last week's poll question, John, what was it?
It was wormhole or warp drive. And a whopping 16% of you said wormhole, 84% of you said warp drive. I kind of get it. I think there's an elegance to the warp drive. You get to pick where you're going. Wormhole, though, there's certainly a convenience. You go in, and then maybe you say hi to the wormhole aliens that could be worshipped as gods if you are so inclined, and then you just end up in another place. So that's kind of cool, too. But most of you, an overwhelming majority, opted for warp drive. Given maybe some of the inherent problems with warp drive, given that it might break down at some point. See, the thing about the wormhole is you could be in like an 85 Honda, and that wormhole will still just put you wherever it wants to put you.
See, warp that's drive, the thing.
And
I'm wondering if people are just assuming that it's an unstable wormhole. Because if it's a stable wormhole, I'm going that way every single time. There was some song. Don't place faith in human beings. Human beings are unreliable things. Don't place faith in human beings. Human beings will fail you. And they build warp drives. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. Aliens, on the other hand, they build the wormhole to last.
Yeah, right. That we know of. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we haven't gotten all the way through Deep Space Nine, so I guess it's possible. So this week, not unlike the wormhole or warp drive, hey, here's a question for you: spacesuits or space? I'll tell you what sort of brought this question to our mind is we kind of want to know what drives a show or a movie for you. Is it the things people wear? Is it the costumes, the makeup? Or is it the the props they carry, the ships they sail around the universe and the buildings that they inhabit? Is it the stuff or the stuff on them? Is it the space suits or the spaceships? Your vote counts, and that we'll be counting them, even though your vote doesn't actually do anything except for add up. Right now, it's spacesuits 1%. Although I got to figure, John, it is possible that our guest tonight, though unintentionally, may have his thumb on the scale a tiny bit.
Ooh, you think? See, I think our guest, Mr. Rick Sternbach, he might have a thing to say about either one, and some people, even in the conversation there, they were saying, you can't have a space suit without a spaceship.
Oh, I had a spacesuit.
You did?
I've never had a spaceship. Yeah, totally. I dressed. Actually, this would probably speak to both you, John, and Rick, who we will, I swear to God, bring on at some point.
Right now.
Oh, there he is. Yeah. One of my favorite spacesuits, actually, or costumes, was a 1950s idea of what someone in the year 2000 would dress like. So obviously, I had a spacesuit, but I had to lie about whether or not I had a spaceship because I didn't. Anyway, hi, Rick.
Hi, you can.
Rick, welcome to the show. We could go through the resume. I mean, I think most of our listeners know that you have had a hand in Trek for so long. It's a real pleasure to have you here with us. And let's just kick things off with the obvious question. Give us your Trek story.
Wow, my Trek story. It pretty much starts when I was a teenager watching the original series. Thought it was fantastic. It was different. It was so different from a lot of the science fiction films that I grew up with in the 50s and the early 60s. And holy cow, they were talking about real scientific concepts that maybe one of these days we might see. So, and I mean, it got me hooked along with the real space program, because when the original series came out, we were hot and heavy into human spaceflight. Project Mercury, Project Gemini, Apollo was underway. So, for me as a teenager growing up in the mid '60s, this was like, oh my God, this is space heaven.
So then, I mean, so Star Trek is part of your background in a way, but then I jokingly said, somebody, in the 1950s may be wondering what somebody in the year 2000 would act like, dress like, be like. I know you and John especially share a love of sort of like a retro futurism. John, I know you had a ton of stuff you wanted to ask Rick about.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that retro futurism. There's something about that mid-century science fiction that is so cool to me. I think partly because it's the first time that space exploration stood a chance of becoming a real thing. So you have science fiction before that and science fiction after that. And there's this real golden period where everybody's excited to try to figure it out. Now, you just mentioned, you're talking about the influences that you had as a kid. It shows like Disneyland's Man in Space, and the work done there by Ward Kimball, and then series like Men into Space in the late 50s, featuring work by Chesley Bonestall. I want you to tell us about that and why those shows had such an impact on you. I'm going to ask Brandon, our technical director, to show. We have some images of, I believe it's models that you built of some of Bonestall's rocket work, his designs from Men into Space. So I'd like to put those up on screen.
Right. There's one very retro-looking rocket with the Delta winged glider up on top. The other image that I shipped over to you was a ship that I cobbled together based on a lot of very current thinking about how are we going to get out of Earth orbit, get back to the moon, get out to Mars, get out to other places in the solar system. Okay, but before the original Star Trek series, yes, I was an 8-year-old kid growing up in front of the television set, watching Men into Space. And there was, a full season of spaceships and guys in spacesuits and building space stations and going to the moon. And it was all very sort of Air Force oriented, but they covered pretty much every possible scenario. A rip in your suit, getting stuck in a cave on the moon. And for me, growing up at a time when there was nothing in Earth orbit, this stuff was just amazing. Okay. So starting from the late 50s all the way through the 60s, you had popular media, showing us what the future might be like. Near future with a show like Men into Space or the Disney Man in Space films, up through Star Trek, the original series. And beyond. Star Trek didn't really stop at the end of the third season. There were comics, there were toys, there were just all kinds of ancillary things that people were interested in. And then you started seeing all of those episodes being reshown, and you had the convention world opening up.
Can I ask, you're talking, you're a visual guy and you're talking a lot about what you saw on TV, things like that. What were you reading at the time? Was it Asimov? Was it Clark? Was it Amazing Stories? Was it Popular Mechanics? Because I know Popular Mechanics, still, when I was a kid, which is a few years after you, my favorite issues of Popular Mechanics were the ones that had, a gigantic space shuttle with 300 people on the way to the moon, or
Right.
things like that. I mean, was it just TV and movies, or what else was speaking to you at the time?
I know. Well, I mean, yes, I grew up in front of the TV, and I got to see science fiction movies, at the theater. And luckily, we had a house full of books. So, I grew up mostly from my dad, who was an architect back in Connecticut. And he brought me up on a steady diet of steam locomotives, naval vessels, aircraft, all of the boy things, okay, all of the guy hardware. And at the same time, I was reading comics, I was reading science fiction, and yes, you mentioned authors like Asimov and Clarke. I eventually picked up on reading science fiction magazines, science fiction novels, novellas, all the way through the point where I was able to meet these authors and illustrate their works. Well,
can we talk about that real quick? I'm just curious. So you made the jump though from being a fan and an enthusiast and just absorbed with science fiction to then that being your job, that being your livelihood, and better yet, working on Star Trek. Star Trek the Motion Picture is your first professional gig in that world. I'm just curious, can you tell us kind of the nutshell version of going from fan to professional?
The quick story is that not so quick. I was reading science fiction. I was reading, as Ken says, magazines like Popular Mechanics and Popular Science, and just keeping an ear to the track about everything that was happening in the sciences, in space exploration, and got hooked. Okay, my dad wanted me to follow him in the architecture game, but I think early on I was just hooked onto science and space. When I graduated high school in 1969, I told my folks, I have to go to the Cape. I have to go to the Cape. So I got to see Apollo 11 take off in person, 9 miles away from the launch pad, but I could say, yes, I was there. I witnessed this bit of history. Came home, got into painting and drawing. And, again, my dad being an architect, I had the pencil put in my hand at a very early age. So I learned a bit about drafting, a bit about light and shadow and color, got tubes of paint, got boards to paint on, brushes, the whole 9 yards, and started painting a lot of science fiction-y, spacey sort of subjects. And eventually, through another one of my mentors, G. Harry Stein, who was NAR #2. He taught thousands of us how to fly model rockets. Well, Harry was very good friends with Ben Bova, who was editor at Analog. And I was away on a trip somewhere, but I left a lot of my work behind. Harry showed my stuff to Ben, and Ben said, okay, we'll give the kid a cover.
Nice. That's very cool.
Which totally knocked me out.
No doubt. We want to get to the part where you go then from that into the Star Trek universe in a bit, but I want to remind people first, 646-558-8656 is the phone number to call. 646-558-8656, or you can join the Zoom meeting, be on the video part of it. by using the one tap from your smartphone and then entering the thing and doing the thing. And yeah, people do it every week, so it can't be that hard to figure out, although I personally have never tried. We do have a caller on the line, actually. Dave is here, man. Dave, how's it going this evening?
Hi, how you doing?
Doing all right. What's your question for Rick?
First of all, Mr. Sternbach, it's a great honor to talk to you. I've enjoyed your work, since the spaceflight chronology, actually.
Thanks.
And I just wonder, on the Next Generation, it really, there was a lot more detail, I guess, fleshed out as far as how everything on the Enterprise worked, transporters and the engines and the phasers and all that stuff. Even behind the scenes, you guys had a writer's technical manual that you wrote before the commercial version was released. And what I'm wondering is, were those things that you were directed to come up with, or did you just kind of do that on your own? As far as like exactly how the transporter worked.
Well, I have to tell you that when Mike Okuda got hired on, Mike and I, we would sit down over lots and lots of noodles, pizza, whatever, talking in the office, and coming up with notes for the writers and producers. Which eventually became the writer's guide, which eventually became the tech manual. But Mike and I, we were two sides of the same coin, looking at this technology and wondering, okay, you can transport somebody. How? So we thought about it. And taking a lot of cues from the original series and from a couple of the things that we saw in the feature films, and we began to try to nail this stuff. Okay, not as a demand, okay, this is how you do it, but more of an offering of ideas on how we might be able to talk about the tech parts of this in a consistent manner, okay? But not get too overly technical about it. I mean, I love this stuff. Don't get me wrong. But I don't want to fill the actors' mouths with just handfuls of terminology, okay? Because Gene Roddenberry said it, I think he said it best. You don't explain how the six gun works, you show it, okay? But we wanted to make sure that the writers had a consistent box of information that they could go back to if they needed to.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Hey, David, thank you so much for calling in. All right.
Thanks.
All right.
I want to ask you, Rick, because I think you and I had a discussion, I want to say close to 2 years ago now at a convention that we were at, where you were talking about the Communicator. And I was actually visiting your site again earlier today, getting ready for tonight's show. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because there's an early version of the next gen Communicator, which has the Delta and it's got the circle behind it. But what it's really got is it's about that thick, it looks like, and it's got this thing where it would have had all the parts that would work, right? And somewhere along the way, I can't remember if it was you or Mike or who it was, but somewhere along the way, you were like, nobody's going to see that. It's going to look, well, I mean, not to be too much, but it's going to look like this, right? I mean, there's no indication of how this works, but it does. I mean, is there, with your love of, I mean, especially going back to, I mean, so much of what was cool about the space stuff of the 50s and 60s was you looked at it and it said space. I mean, is there a difficulty in sort of letting less be more in some situations?
Well, I mean, you mentioned the Communicator specifically, and what happened in that case was, I took some cues off of what we saw in the original show. The wrist units that we saw in the films. Okay. And I just started, sketching up a lot of complicated looking hardware. Okay. And Gene took one look at these sketches and he said, why not just make it the Starfleet emblem? Which was a head slap moment for me. And I just said, oh my God, you're right. Put all of the guts behind the more elegant shape. And I didn't have a problem with that. Okay. Early sketches for a lot of the stuff, on TNG, a lot of the early sketches, we had a very limited number of design cues that we could study. Okay. And I didn't mind drawing, sketch after sketch after sketch and showing them to the producers and getting some kind of reaction. Okay. How do you want to see this going? Okay. And the inspiration for the comm badge was a more simple, elegant shape. And along the way, okay, we developed some of the procedures. We talked to the writers and producers about, okay, how do you use this here? Okay, you tap to activate. And after everybody got on board with what this thing was and what it was supposed to do, then we started filling in a lot of the background information about it. Okay, all the techie stuff about, okay, the batteries, the sensors, what's the range of the comm badge if you're standing on a planet. Okay, and we developed all that as we went along. Okay, things like the Hypospray. Okay, I've written about the Hypospray in some of the magazine articles and things. I thought it would have to be another two-handed gizmo, like what McCoy was using, right? And at the time I was drawing these things up, I had a little bit of an asthmatic condition, and I had an albuterol inhaler. And I looked at this thing and I said, oh my God, maybe I can turn this into a one-handed injector. Okay. Gene and, Bob Jessman and Rick Berman, Gene particularly wanted these props to be smaller, faster, sleeker, and the one-handed hypo. It grew out of a real piece of medical technology, okay, which was perfect. You had the housing, you had the drug container, which would slip into it, and then you would use it. And that's how things started evolving on Next Generation.
Somebody in our chat, by the way, Chris Riker says, but how does the communicator always reach the person you want on the first try? How did mankind uninvent voicemail? And Chris, that would be truly a sign of a thoughtful and progressed future, as uninventing voicemail. Yes.
I want to do three things really quickly. The first is you keep mentioning this Gene person. And I think I may know who you're talking about, but I want to get to the part where you guys are, in the same room working on the same kinds of things. But before we do that, I want to remind people how to get in touch with us. 646-558-8656 is the phone number to call, 646-558-8656. Or you can join our Zoom meeting. You can also use the one tap from your smartphone. And then between those things, we also need to do a little bit of business, I think, Mr. Champion.
I would love to do a little bit of business. So before we get back to our conversation with Rick and your questions and comments, we would like to remind you about our shop. It is incredibly convenient for you to find. You just go over to missionlogpodcast.com. You look in the upper right-hand corner and you click on shop, and boy, howdy, a world of shopping awaits. Our friend Carl Huber is cranking out some amazing top-notch designs for you, and designs that just run the gamut. Ken, if you would please, what kind of designs might you find at the Mission Log shop?
Well, it's you and me on a chip.
What?
Icelandier, John and Ken. I know. Icelandier, John and Ken are there. Carbon chauvinism is represented there with a Da Vinci twist. Also, there is life in the silicon supporters yet. Oh, yes, there is. Your favorite lieutenant and mine, Lieutenant J, is represented. Bong Bonk on the head since 1966. That's where we start to get a tiny bit retro. Of course, you can go back even further with Ethos, Pathos, Logos. Yes, you're still allowed to be cool as Kirk. There's some swag from the Ditalics Mining Corporation. Really just all kinds of stuff there that you can check out and take with you. And then here's the thing. You can take it with you lots of different ways. You can drink from a cup with a ton of that stuff on it. You can stick that stuff all over the place. You can wear it as a shirt. And
wait, Ken, I'm looking for something. I like to decorate. I'm looking for something where if I took one of those designs and say I wanted to blow it up, but I don't just want a poster. I don't want it on paper. I want it on fabric.
No. What are you, like a plebeian? Of course you don't want paper. No, you want...
I know. I'm looking for something in the range of a tapestry.
You could be looking for something in the range of a tapestry. And yes, you will find that and all that other stuff we talked about. Missionlogpodcast.com. In the upper right-hand corner, it does say shop, and you could let your geek flag fly. In fact, I'll bet you could take that tapestry and just make it a geek flag and fly that wherever you go.
You could. All right, guys, now's your chance to call in 646-558-8656. And once again, we are talking to Rick Sternbach. So, Rick, we threw a lot of questions and thoughts and ideas at you before we went to the break there. I believe that, let's see, Ken, we left off on a cliffhanger with your last question.
There's this Gene person that he keeps mentioning. I kind of want to guess a Gene guy, but I don't even know that. It could be Gene Rayburn. It could be Gene Simmons, either the actress or the guy from Kiss.
Yeah.
It could actually be Gene Roddenberry. So we've talked about how you got into working in science fiction art professionally. We've talked a lot about, suddenly we're 20 years down the road and you're working on Next Gen and things that come after that. How did you end up working on /for/with Star Trek?
When I was still living in Connecticut, before coming out to Los Angeles, I was living just a little north of New Haven, Connecticut. And I see in the paper, Gene Roddenberry is coming to Yale University to do a screening of The Cage. And I don't know what possessed me, but I cold called his office. This is 1974. Okay. This is barely 2 years after we stopped going to the moon. So I cold called his office. I don't remember who exactly I spoke with, but I said, hi, my name is Rick Sternbach. I do science fiction book and magazine illustrations, and I understand Gene is coming to town. Would it be possible to maybe meet with him for a few minutes after the screening? And the answer was yes. And I went down to the auditorium. I met up with Gene afterwards, and we ended up talking for about 2.5 hours. And it was just the most astounding conversation to hear him talk about the future. About what our future might be in space, what his future plans might be for another television show, for a Star Trek film. it wasn't going to happen for another 4 years with Star Trek the Motion Picture. Well, let me back up. Star Trek Phase 2. Okay. So, we parted ways, and he knew what I could do with science fiction and space hardware and situations and things like that. Fast forward a little bit. In 1977, I was contacted to work on the Cosmos miniseries with Carl Sagan. And this is a weird sort of DNA spiral that got me out to California. I was able to hook up with the folks at Paramount doing Phase 2. Joe Jennings was the production designer. I got to meet Mike Miner, who was a wonderful illustrator. Mike understood science fiction film. And I got to meet Bob Burns through Mike. And I got to meet some of the set designers who were working on Phase 2. And it was a bit slow. And this was like late 77. So I left some color slides. I left a couple of printed covers that I had done, and a business card, and waited. Well, April 78, I get a phone call from Joe Jennings. They're announcing the feature in the morning. Do you want to come in? What was I going to say? No? And Joe was old school. We got to talk a lot about film, about just what the expectations were for this motion picture. Okay, they were gonna ramp up from a television series right up to a feature film, and I got started at my desk the morning after the press conference, and then it was maybe another 7 or 8 months, that I was on board, learning and talking with all of the people in the office. I mean, Joe Jennings left to work on Shogun, and Harold Michelson came in as the new production designer. Well, Harold was just amazing. He worked with Hitchcock. He could do storyboards in dark pencil and charcoal, and I learned so much from Harold, and got involved with a lot of the techie stuff on the ship. Did a lot of the control panel graphics along with Lee Cole. She had previously worked on things like the B-1 bomber. So Mike Miner and Lee Cole and me and John Cartwright was our lead set designer. And the motion picture was just an astounding crash course in working on a popular science fiction product. And that is something I will never, ever forget.
All right. Well, we have a couple of video callers standing by, I'm happy to say. We have Will, who is waiting patiently. Will, are you there?
I'm Ken. Hello.
Oh, hey there. Oh, audio for Will tonight. How are you, Will?
I'm doing great, Ken. Thanks for having me, John and Ken. I appreciate that. I do have a question for Rick. Yes.
Excellent.
Rick, I've followed your work for years. I've read a couple of the Star Trek magazines where your work was highlighted, and seen some of your videos posted on YouTube. And the question I have for you tonight is the Enterprise C redesign. One was originally designed for the show that was on the back wall by Andy, and you redesigned that for yesterday's Enterprise. Could you tell us how that came about, that they were going to redesign that model for production? Was that because of how fast they had to make it and they needed something that was a little more tangible, or could you explain how that came about?
Well, we had the ship wall with the silhouettes, the ship shapes up there. Well, we also had one color sketch that Andy Probert had done at a very sort of a shallow angle, so you really couldn't see exactly the shape of the saucer and that sort of thing. Well, I mean, who knew that they were going to call for this ship to be a real thing? So I had to get drawings together. I had to get some blueprints ready for our model maker, Greg Jean. And with the, you mentioned the time that we had, which was very little. So I had to kind of build in a few shortcuts. Instead of an oval saucer, a round saucer was going to make Greg's work so much easier. I tried to keep the flavor of what Andy had done in his color sketch. So they're balances, they're trade-offs in order to get this thing done and not have to resort to, let's say, a miniature we had seen before. I drew this thing up in order to be buildable. The engineering hall, same basic story. The cross section of the engineering hall went from being oval to round. So it was a compromise, and I think in the end a nice blending between the Enterprise D and the Excelsior.
I thought it was one of the best designed ships in the series. Immediately when you saw it, I said, "That's the Enterprise." It was a much better design, I thought, than the D that was used in the show. I was almost wishing, Hawaii, they could have used that model as our hero ship during that series. And I thought it was one of your best designed starships. When I first looked at the Voyager, to be honest with you, I thought, wow, how cute. It's a mini Battlestar Galactica with the short warp pylons.
No.
But I thought the Enterprise C, your interpretation of it, was one of the best designed Enterprises in the entire lineage. And I was just wondering how that had come about and why the redesign was done. And I just wanted to say thank you.
It was, well, thank you. It was an act of desperation. It worked. It came out fine. I actually like the Eagle Moss C that Andy designed, and they finally got to put it into a physical form. And I understand the shapes that Andy put into his concept ship. I like them both.
Will, thank you very much for calling in this evening. We do appreciate your calling.
Thanks, guys, for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem at all. 646-558-8656 is the phone number to call. 646-558-8656. You could call in just like Will did, or you could use the Zoom meeting and use the one tap from the smartphone and be on in video, as our friend Craig is about to be right now. I'm guessing Craig did that whole Zoom thing that is still kind of a mystery to me. But we can talk about what's a mystery to me some other time. Craig, you have a question for Rick tonight.
Yeah, the Zoom was pretty easy. Yeah, don't worry about that. So first I'd like to show my gratitude to the technical manual that I have right here. You can see that there. Brings back memories, I'm sure, for Rick. I had it since I was 15,
Oh, yeah.
a long time ago. But I just want to ask more of a general question. I'm wondering about, like, what was one of your harder designers or like more controversial designs that you had to kind of sort of, fight with the writers about? I want to hear a little bit of dirt in the writers' room. If you got something like that to tell us about.
Me, no. I was in the art department, and I was chained to my drafting table, as it were. And I have to be honest with you. In the 15 or so years that I spent with the franchise, okay, I never tried to fight my way to a final design. Okay, I started with a lot of sketch work. Got the writers and producers to sign off on a general direction. I will say right up front, episodic television is a harsh mistress. All right, we don't have time to fight through all of these designs. Okay, they trusted me. And the other illustrators that we have had in the franchise, like over at DS9, Ricardo Delgado, John Eaves, Jim Martin, we all have just worn our pencils down to nubs, turning out these ships and props. And again, the producers trusted us. Yes, there were designs that I did that got chucked out, and they said, "Look, do another half dozen doodles, and we'll see." Okay, we got paid just as much to erase as to draw. Okay, and we did it, and we were support for the shows. So if there was anything that got a little tiny bit frustrating, it was one episode of Deep Space Nine where somewhere in the story they came across the most fabulous object in the galaxy. What should that look like? We had no idea. I think John Eaves did a couple of sketches. I did a bunch of sketches. And we kept going back and doing more and doing more. But for me, with things like spaceships, okay, alien ships, Starfleet ships, I was very, very lucky to have a lot of these sail through with a minimum of changes. I will say, and this is kind of a famous story already, Voyager got totally changed in midstream. I had what I thought was a valid, fast-looking, kick-ass little ship. And Jerry Taylor, I love her to pieces. Jerry Taylor, the producer, took me aside and said, "Look, can you make it a little curvier, kind of like a Lexus?" And I said, "Okay. And for you, Jerry, anything." But luckily, the concept version of Voyager is now a little physical die-cast model. Okay, and I'm glad that folks have recognized that could have been Voyager. Okay, I thought it was valid. The producers allowed us to get all the way up to a 3-foot mock-up before Jerry told me to kind of make it curvy.
Craig, did you have anything else for Rick tonight?
Not really, but I did like in Deep Space Nine. Remember that sail, like the old Bajoran sailboat they had in space?
Jim Martin. That was the Jim Martin ship.
That was really cool. Did you have any involvement in that one, or?
No, see, what a lot of people I think don't really understand is that we had two separate art departments. Okay. Next Generation and Voyager were in one building, and DS9 and the feature films and Star Trek Enterprise were in a different location. Okay. I only worked on DS9 for about like the first 3 seasons. And Jim Martin and John Eves and Ricardo Delgado, each contributed some just amazing work.
Yeah, I love that. That was great.
Yeah. We did what we could. We did everything that we could.
Craig, thank you very much for calling in tonight, and give us a call back again sometime, okay?
Yeah, thanks, Ken.
Thank you. 646-558-8656 is the phone number to call. 646-558-8656. Got about 10 minutes left in the show. But we got a couple of other questions coming up as well. Before we do that, though, I want to remind you about something that we would love it if you did it after the show. Right after this show, actually. Stay on Facebook and catch the live recording of Priority One, also a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. Each Tuesday at 11 Eastern, 8 Pacific, Elijah, Kenna, and Anthony bring you news from all over the Star Trek multiverse. That's for you, Anthony. So be sure and check that out. It's TV and movie news. It's gaming news. It's literary reviews. It's all kinds of stuff. They do that every Tuesday night right after our shows. So hopefully you brought lots of snacks before you sat down for this, because there's no time. Oh, no, there's no time. Immediately after this show, go to facebook.com/PriorityOnePodcast and check out the live stuff that they do. If that gets too late for you, if you need to go to bed, if you need to rest your weary head, it's okay. It'll be out as a podcast on Friday. So podcast.roddenberry.com, or just search for Priority One wherever you get your podcasts. Before the show started, Rick, we actually had a video caller from our friend Earl. He had a question for you, and let's see if we can bring him in via tape.
Really excited to have Rick Sternbach on this week, because he is one of my heroes in the area of astronomical artwork. And I'm sure a lot of people will remember him from Next Gen. The first time I remember becoming aware of his work was in 1980, when I was, a kid perusing the credits of Carl Sagan's Cosmos on PBS, which that show featured some greats in the field of space artwork, people like Don Dixon, Adolf Schuller, and Rick himself. And I'm really tempted to ask an open-ended question such as, what was it like working on Cosmos? But to kind of keep things in a Trekkish vein, I'm also curious as to whether it was ever a fight to depict space accurately versus depicting it as, cool, whiz-bang, let's just put some multicolored nebulae over here for no good reason. I wonder if that was ever a fight at any point during his time working on the Trek series.
So, Rick, how convenient that you had mentioned Cosmos not that long ago, and then Earl had a question. Well, he had a comment about how much he liked your work on Cosmos, and he wants to know about the science versus science fiction in Star Trek. Were there moments that it was a struggle to say, oh, but the real science would be this, but to make it artistic and neat looking, it's this other thing? Where do you draw that line, and what were those battles like?
Well, again, they weren't exactly battles. Okay, but Mike Okuda and I, we did our level best to provide the writers with bits and pieces that they might want to work into dialogue or work into descriptions of outer space scenes outside the ship. So we gathered together as much information as we could. I have a number of friends who are, they're honest to God astronomers, real life engineers. One of my pals is Dr. Steve Howe, who has been working with real antimatter. And Steve taught me everything I needed to know about how the warp core would work with deuterium, anti-deuterium, how hot the plasma would be to drive the ship. So we put all of this stuff together. We put all this information together, and the writers would send us script pages, okay, with some of the tech missing, okay? You know, Geordie, Captain, we have to tech the tech. And we helped out with the proper terminology. And again, like I said, I didn't want to fill their mouths with incomprehensible stuff, okay? Yes, I will take the blame for a little bit of techno babble, but to me, if it's correct, it's not babble. You know, if that makes any sense. But we tried to make it as simple as we could, and also tailored for the different characters. Okay, Riker wouldn't say the same sorts of tech as Geordi. Okay, so you know, we over the years, okay, over TNG and Voyager, especially for me, we came up with like, I don't know, maybe 3,000 pages of notes that we hoped would be helpful, you know, and I think it worked out pretty well.
Actually, one of our listeners says, Jeff says, how the warp core works. Very well, thank you.
Yeah.
So that's...
Wait, that's Mike Okuda's answer for the Heisenberg compensators.
Oh, nice. Good. Yeah, and they do work well until they don't. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Well, they work and they don't work at the same time.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Very good.
I've got a question for you really quickly. Thinking about the different things that you have worked on. I mean, there's sort of movie era Trek. There's TNG Trek. And then when you go to Deep Space Nine has a very different sort of visual language than everything we had seen to TNG at that point. At the same time, the crew on Next Gen is relatively regularly speaking the visual language of Klingons as well. I'm curious, is there one that is like the one that you're like, oh yeah, when I could go back and start drawing Cardassians, tech, or when I can go in and start, really digging in on later Federation tech. I mean, is there one of those languages that speaks to you personally from a visual standpoint?
Well, I think I had, it was a toss up for me for the most interesting non-Starfleet. Okay, Starfleet I could do in my sleep. Okay, but the interesting stuff was really the Klingon stuff and the Cardassian stuff. Because they, especially when we were starting out providing sketches for Deep Space Nine, Herman Zimmerman, the production designer, said, we have to start thinking like Cardassians, okay, with the shape of the station, with the pylons, taking some cues off of the costumes. The makeup on the Cardassian neck, we would work that sort of stuff in, okay? And I mean, look at the way Russian space hardware does not look exactly like American space hardware, okay? There are shapes that are unique to each side, okay? And when doing a Cardassian ship, okay, like the Gaylord class cruiser, okay, I went through a lot of different sketches on that until finally Peter Lauritsen, our visual effects producer, said, "Oh, just make it weird," because I was going in a very a very sort of simple, mundane kind of a spaceship shape. And then I thought to myself, oh my God, why not borrow, again, simpler shapes? Look at the Egyptian Ankh symbol. Okay, and there's some, for me, there are sort of visual connections between the Cardassians and the Egyptian pharaohs and that sort of thing. So the Gaylord class ship became very much like the Ankh. And that's how I approached a lot of the detail shapes on the Cardassian hardware. And like Herman said, we had to think like Cardassians. Their shapes were different. Starfleet people were not used to all that stuff, and they said so in dialogue. So I think for Deep Space Nine to look the way it did, I think was just an absolute triumph.
Rick, we cannot thank you enough. You're an awesome guest and a heck of a guy, and we have hit the end of our show, which means you have to come back sometime. We really hope that you'll join us again and do another round of Trek talk and science and sci-fi talk with us.
You bet.
All right. Folks, I want to remind you of a couple of things. One is to like and share this video, because we sure do appreciate it when you appreciate us. Mission Log Live is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. Executive producer, Rod Roddenberry. Technical production on Mission Log Live by Infinity Networks. Producer, Brandon Bradley. Be sure to visit podcast.roddenberry.com for the latest from the Roddenberry Star Trek Roddenberry Podcast Network, including not just Mission Log, but also Women at Warp, Priority One, and the Trek Files. Thanks to everyone who joined us live or later, and we will talk to you next week.